My son slapped a typed rental notice onto my Christmas plate between the glazed ham and the cranberry sauce, and in front of 12 people he said, "Pay rent by January 1st or get out of my house." The paper had my full name on it, a monthly amount highlighted in yellow, and a forged note at the bottom that read, "As discussed." I still remember the tiny grease stain in the corner, the one shaped like a thumbprint, because while everyone at that table froze with their forks in the air, I realized two things at once. First, my son had planned this humiliation. Second, the deed to that house was still in my maiden name. How I got from that dinner to watching him carry his own boxes down the same front steps in wet February cold is a longer story than anyone in my family likes to tell. But it began months before Christmas, with a mug of coffee and a silence I should have feared sooner. Until that winter, I had been the kind of woman people described as dependable when they wanted to praise me and convenient when they wanted to use me. My name is Eleanor Brooks, though most people called me Ellie unless they wanted something signed, borrowed, cooked, cleaned, covered, explained, or forgiven. I was 62, widowed for 7 years, and still living in the two-story colonial my husband Mark and I had bought when interest rates were ugly and our backs were young. It sat on a quiet street lined with maples and half-finished good intentions, the kind of place where people left wreaths up too long and knew which dog belonged to which porch bark. The house smelled, depending on the hour, of coffee, old books, lemon oil, and the faint dry warmth of radiator heat. It had a front hall runner I kept meaning to replace and a grandfather clock Mark had inherited from his father. A clock that clicked and breathed and marked every silence in the house like it was counting what I had left. My mornings had a rhythm that made grief livable. I padded downstairs in wool socks, pressed my palm to the cool kitchen counter, filled the kettle, and watched the small burst of blue flame catch under it. I ground coffee beans fresh because Mark used to insist stale coffee was an insult to the day, and some habits survive the people who start them. While the kettle hissed and the grinder rattled, I fed my old tabby June, who wound around my ankles and complained in a rusty little voice as if she had been neglected for years instead of 3 minutes. Then I stood at the sink with my mug and looked out at the backyard fence where a section still leaned slightly from the storm 2 springs earlier. Ordinary things. Manageable things. The kind of things that tell you life is still yours. My son Greg had not always been cruel. That sentence matters even now. If he had been born sharp-edged, if he had spent his whole life with that sneer in the corner of his mouth and calculation behind his eyes, then maybe I would have guarded myself better. But Greg had once been the boy who brought me dandelions with roots attached because he thought flowers should stay alive. He had once sat at the kitchen table, all knees and elbows, telling me solemnly at age 9 that when he grew up he would buy me a beach house, so I could hear calm. Even as a man he could still, on good days, sound so much like my child that my body forgot to be wary before my mind had a chance to catch up. He was 36 that Christmas, broad-shouldered, handsome in the blunt way his father had been. With dark blonde hair he wore too long on top and a habit of smiling only with one side of his mouth. He worked in residential real estate, or at least that was the cleanest version of what he did. He flipped houses, connected buyers, cut corners, charmed inspectors, and called it hustle. The market rewards speed, Mom, he had told me more than once, tapping his phone with 2 fingers as if every answer in life lived behind glass. People who hesitate get buried. I always thought he meant business. Later I understood he meant people. His wife Dana came wrapped in competence the way some women come wrapped in perfume. She was 32, neat without seeming stiff, with ash-brown hair she tucked behind one ear when she was irritated and a voice so smooth it could make bad news sound like a spa recommendation. She worked remotely in medical billing and never appeared flustered. Even when the kids were shouting, a casserole was boiling over, and Greg was stomping around cursing over a misplaced charger. If Greg was force, Dana was strategy. She called me Mom, in a soft tone that always landed half an inch away from warmth. For a long time I mistook that distance for reserve. It was measurement. They had 2 children, Ava and Mason, who were innocent in the clean, bright way children are before adults start drafting them into their wars. Ava was 8 and loved horses with a feverish sincerity that covered her bedroom in manis and hooves and impossible eyelashes. Mason was 5 and believed all trucks were worthy of reverence. When they came into my house, they came in like weather systems, dropping shoes in different zip codes and asking for snacks before their coats were off. I adored them with the helplessness grandparents understand too well. Their presence could blur my judgment faster than any lie. The first shift happened after Greg called one Sunday afternoon in early autumn. I was folding towels in the den, the television on mute, June asleep in a square of sun. Greg's name lit up my phone. He sounded breathless, energized, almost boyish. "Mom, don't say no before you hear me out," he said. And I should have known then that I was already being led. "I haven't even heard the question yet," I said, smiling despite myself. "Dana and I need a temporary landing spot. 8 weeks, maybe 10. The condo deal got delayed, and the rental we lined up had a plumbing disaster. You know how this stuff goes." I folded a towel more carefully than necessary. "How temporary is temporary, Greg?" 2 months, tops," he said quickly. I heard a car door slam in the background. Then Dana saying something muffled. "The kids would love being there. We'd help with groceries, utilities, everything. Honestly, we'd probably be doing you a favor. House gets lively again." That last sentence sat oddly with me. Not because it was untrue, but because of the way he delivered it, as if loneliness were a lever he could pull. Still, I looked around my quiet den, at the framed photo of Mark in his navy sweater, at the folded towels no one would appreciate but me, and I pictured Ava in the upstairs hall, and Mason pushing toy trucks under the dining room chairs. The house had held noise before. Maybe it could again. 8 weeks, I said. "Mom, you are a lifesaver." Relief rushed into his voice so fast it felt rehearsed. "Seriously. We'll make this easy." Dana came on the line before I could answer. "Thank you, Ellie. Truly. We'll stay out of your hair." That phrase stayed with me too. Not because they kept it, but because they didn't. They moved in the following Saturday with 3 overstuffed suitcases, 7 plastic storage bins, 2 tablets, a portable crib they swore they only kept, just in case, for overnight trips, and enough electronics chargers to wire a small clinic. Greg carried things in as if he were doing me a favor, by stepping over my threshold. Dana walked through the kitchen with one of those neutral surveying glances people use in hotels and houses they're considering changing. The children exploded upward toward the guest rooms with shrieks of delight. June vanished for 6 hours. The first week had a temporary feel to it. Their toiletries lined the upstairs hall bathroom in orderly rows. Their clothes remained mostly in suitcases. Dana bought groceries and labeled leftovers with dates in tiny neat handwriting. Greg offered to look at my sagging back gate and the dripping faucet in the laundry room, but somehow never found the time. At dinner he told stories about impossible buyers and greedy sellers while scrolling his phone under the table. Dana corrected the children in a tone that sounded pleasant enough if you didn't listen to the steel under it. I told myself the friction I felt was simply adjustment. A full house always has edges. Still there were things. Little things. The first micro-crack came on the 4th evening, when I came downstairs after folding laundry and found Dana standing on a chair in my pantry, rearranging shelves. "Oh," I said, stopping in the doorway. "What are you doing?" She turned, one hand on a cereal box, and smiled as if this were entirely natural. "Just making things more efficient. You had baking supplies mixed in with canned goods. It was hard to fit the kids' snacks. Hard to fit. In my pantry." I laughed a little because I didn't know what else to do. "I've somehow survived this long." "I know," she said lightly, stepping down. "I just think systems help." The word systems lingered after she left the room. It was not the pantry. It was the assumption. Another evening I came in from watering the porch mums and heard Greg in the dining room with the phone tucked between his shoulder and ear. His voice dropped when he saw me. He turned his body slightly away, one hand flattening papers on the table. "No, we can probably move it faster than that," he murmured. "I said she'd sign if we position it right." My hand tightened around the little brass watering can handle. What would I sign? He looked up too quickly. "Nothing, Mom. Work stuff." His smile came late, and for one strange second I felt cold under my sweater. Then Ava barreled into my knees asking where the markers were, and the moment dissolved into crayons and dinner and normal noise. But I remembered the sentence. I remembered the pronoun. A week later, Dana brought me tea in my blue mug, the one with a tiny chip at the rim Mark had made when he dropped it years ago, and then acted as if he'd committed a federal crime. Dana set the mug beside me while I was sorting mail. You need to let us help more, she said. You've been carrying this house alone too long. I'm doing all right, I replied. She leaned one hip against the counter. Of course you are. But wouldn't it be smarter to consolidate some responsibilities? Greg is good with paperwork, bills, all of that. You don't need to stress over every little thing. I looked at her over my reading glasses. Are my bills stressing you out? She laughed softly. No. I'm just saying families should make life easier for each other. We're family. It was the first time she said it with that particular emphasis, warm on the surface, adhesive underneath. At the time it sounded caring. Later I would hear the access request hidden in it. The house began changing in small humiliating ways that could each be defended if isolated. The hall closet filled with Greg's coats until my own winter coat hung from a hook in the laundry room. Mason's plastic dump truck parked permanently in front of the back door. Dana shifted my spices alphabetically, for ease. Greg moved his laptop set up onto the corner of my dining room table and left files spread there at all hours, as if polished wood I'd waxed for decades had become annexed office space. They spoke about the house in sentences that no longer included me as owner but as occupant. The house needs a better router. The house really should have the upstairs carpet replaced. The house would show beautifully with lighter paint. Show. That word caught in my ear every time. At work I tried to shake it off. I worked 3 mornings a week at the circulation desk of the local library, a job I had taken after Mark died because books were company and order was a comfort. The library had old oak tables scarred by generations of elbows, and in winter the heating pipes clanked like stubborn ghosts. My closest friend there, Lorraine, was 68 and impossible to intimidate. She wore bright scarves year-round and had the devastating habit of seeing through people before they finished introducing themselves. One Tuesday she watched me stamp returns with more force than necessary and said, "Either someone is dying or someone is staying too long in your house." I looked up. "Why do you assume those are the options?" "Because married sons don't move back in temporarily with color-coded bins unless there's a problem," she said, sliding a stack of mysteries toward me. "And because you look like a woman who hasn't sat in her own kitchen alone in weeks." I exhaled through my nose. "They're just between places." Lorraine gave me a long look over the rims of her red glasses. "Hum. And I'm between tiaras." I laughed despite myself. Then I heard what came out of my own mouth next. "Dana wants Greg to help with my bills." Lorraine didn't react right away. She adjusted the scarf at her throat, buying me the space to hear how strange that sounded. "Did you ask for help?" she said. "No." "Then no. It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple," she said, voice flattening. "Complicated is what people say when they don't want to appear rude while someone reaches into their wallet." I told myself Lorraine was dramatic, that she had always disliked Greg's salesman charm, that widowed mothers and adult sons have friction, that blended households create misunderstandings. Rationalization is a soft blanket. It warms you while the fire spreads under the floor. The first physical sensation of real unease came at the end of October. I woke just after 2 in the morning with my mouth dry and my heart beat high in my throat for no clear reason. The house was quiet except for the grandfather clock and the low refrigerator hum downstairs. Then I heard voices. Not loud. A hiss of words from the kitchen. I slipped from bed, wrapped my robe tight, and stood halfway down the stairs where the banister turned. A wedge of light from the kitchen cut across the dark hall floor. "I'm telling you, if she drags this out, it gets messy," Greg whispered. Dana answered too softly for the words to carry. Then Greg again, sharper now. "We can't keep bleeding money on this condo if the house just sits there." The house. I gripped the banister so hard the carved wood bit into my palm. Maybe they were discussing one of his listings. Maybe. Then Dana said, clearer this time, "Lower your voice." Silence followed. Not true silence. The loaded kind. The kind where 2 people know they've said enough and maybe too much. I stood there barefoot on the cold step until my toes ached. And by the time I went back upstairs, a slick line of sweat had crawled down my spine despite the chill. In bed, I stared at the ceiling and told myself to stop being ridiculous. But the word sits had fused itself to house in my mind, and I did not sleep again. Looking back, that was the moment. That was when I should have understood I was no longer host but obstacle. Instead, I did what women of my generation were trained to do with discomfort. I made breakfast. November came dressed in errands and obligations. School forms, library shifts, a leaking upstairs toilet, Thanksgiving planning, Dana's endless online shopping boxes, Greg's phone calls that stopped when I entered the room. He was sweeter some days, which should have warned me more than his irritation did. He offered to take my car for an oil change. He fixed the back gate after all. He brought me bakery scones one Friday and kissed the top of my head as if I were fragile and beloved. "You do too much, Mom," he murmured. "You need people looking out for you." The line would have sounded tender from anyone else. From him, by then, it felt like a hand testing a latch. Then came the first concrete thing. The first object my fingers touched that turned suspicion into shape. It happened on a gray Wednesday afternoon after a dentist appointment. My mouth was still numb on one side, my purse heavy with paperwork, and all I wanted was to sit in my chair with soup and silence. The house was unusually still. Dana had taken Mason to a pediatric checkup. Ava was at a school friend's house. Greg's SUV was in the drive, but I heard no television, no footsteps, no call. The stillness itself felt wrong, thick as closed curtains. As I passed the dining room, I saw Greg's printer tray extended, a sheaf of pages half slid out. The top page had my address in bold. At first I assumed it was junk or one of his real estate forms accidentally printed there. I almost kept walking. Then I saw my full legal name in block letters, Eleanor N. Brooks. Not Eleanor Brooks. Not Mom. My legal name. Something in my body tightened so sharply my jaw twinged around the Novocaine. I set my purse down on the floor without taking off my coat. The printer gave a tiny mechanical sigh as if settling after work. I remember the room in absurd fragments. The faint smell of toner, the cold smoothness of the dining chair under my hand, the pale winter light reflecting off the china cabinet glass. My fingers hovered above the pages, and then touched the top sheet. It was warm. The first line I read made no sense because my brain refused to arrange the words into threat. Authorization of sale. The page blurred. I blinked hard, leaned closer, and saw an address I knew better than my own reflection. My house. My property. There was legal language beneath, references to temporary power of attorney, listing consent, seller acknowledgement. Halfway down was a signature line. My name had been typed under it. Above it was a wavering imitation of my signature. The numb side of my mouth went from dead to electric in one brutal pulse. A metallic taste flooded my tongue. My fingers started shaking so hard the paper crackled loud in the still room. For one deranged second I thought maybe this was a draft for someone else and he had pasted my address by mistake, maybe some template gone wrong, maybe his client shared my exact middle name and property tax parcel somehow. Maybe. Then I turned the page. There were bank pre-approval notes clipped to the back. Comparative market analysis. A proposed listing date. My stomach clenched so violently I had to brace one hand on the table to stay upright. The room narrowed around the edges. Somewhere in the house a floorboard creaked upstairs, and the sound shot through me like a current. I heard footsteps then. Greg descending. I had just enough time to slide the pages back together before he came into the doorway and stopped. We looked at each other. He took in the papers in my hand, my coat still on, my purse on the floor, my face, and something shuddered in his expression. Not guilt. Calculation. "What are you doing with that?" he asked, and the calm in his voice terrified me more than shouting would have. The skin between my shoulder blades went icy. "What am I doing?" I said. My voice came out crooked because half my mouth was still numb. "What is this?" He stepped into the room, one palm out. "Give me the papers, Mom." "No." He inhaled slowly through his nose. "You're upset because you don't understand what you're looking at." I laughed then, a small sharp sound that scraped my throat. "I understand my name. I understand my address. I understand a forged signature." His jaw flexed. "It's not forged." I stared at him. The audacity of it made my skin prickle. Then when exactly did I sign papers authorizing the sale of my house? "It's a draft," he said. "Just a placeholder. We were exploring options." We. The word hit me harder than the document had. We. I heard the blood in my ears, a low sea roar. Exploring options for whom? For all of us, he said. And there it was again, that smooth, reasonable tone people use when they want your panic to make you look unstable. This place is too much for you, Mom. Taxes, maintenance, stairs. You say yourself you're tired. Dana and I have been trying to think ahead. By forging my signature? His eyes flicked once toward the kitchen as if checking whether Dana had returned. Lower your voice. Something in me turned then, not yet into strength but into clarity. The silence around us sharpened. He was not horrified to be caught. He was annoyed by the timing. You were going to sell my house behind my back, I said. You were going to put me where, Greg? No one said behind your back. He moved closer, voice softening into false patience. We were going to talk to you when we had a clean plan. I held the pages tighter. A clean plan. Yes. He spread his hands. You could move into a senior community, or a smaller condo. Something practical. We could take care of things. You'd have less stress and we could. We could what? I cut in. Use the proceeds? His face hardened. Invest them intelligently. Keep assets in the family instead of bleeding them into upkeep on this museum. That word, museum, struck with surgical cruelty. Mark's clock. The banister polish by years of hands. The pencil marks in the pantry where I had measured Greg's height. Museum. My mouth tasted like a coin. You decided all this for me, I said. He exhaled, impatient now. You always do this. You hear one thing and make it dramatic. I stared at him until his face seemed to separate from the child I had known. Get out of my way, I said. He took one more step, blocking the doorway. Give me the papers. We stood there in the cold white light, mother and son, neither of us blinking. Then a key scraped in the back door. Dana's voice floated in, bright and normal. We're home. Mason fell asleep in the car. Greg's hand shot out toward the documents. Instinct moved before thought. I jerked back, the chair legs scraped the floor, and the top page tore down the side with a ragged paper scream. Mason began crying from the kitchen. Dana stopped speaking. What is going on? She asked, coming into the doorway. I turned to her with the torn pages in my hand. Did you know about this? She took one measured look at the papers, then at Greg. In that tiny pause, in the half-second where she chose not to be surprised, I got my answer. Predatory people often reveal themselves not in what they say, but in how quickly they stop pretending. Ellie, she said carefully. Let's all calm down. The phrase hit me like a slap. My fingers dug crescents into the paper. No. Dana shifted Mason higher on her hip. He was sleepy, damp-cheeked, one fist twisted in her sweater. We discussed possibilities, she said at last. Greg muttered. This is exactly why I said not to leave that stuff out. I looked at him, then back at her, then at the torn line where my fake signature split in two. The numbness in my mouth was gone. Every nerve in me felt flayed. What followed was the first confrontation. And if memory sharpens some scenes beyond kindness, this one deserved every edge. Mason had quieted to hiccuping sniffs on Dana's shoulder. The kitchen light behind them made a gold rectangle on the floor, while the dining room itself stayed cold and shadowed. I could smell the sterile sweetness of the dentist's office still on my own coat, mixed absurdly with applesauce from Mason's hair. Greg reached for the papers again, not forceful now but with the confidence of someone accustomed to eventual compliance. Mom, hand them over, he said, each word clipped. You're scaring the kids. I laughed, and there was no humor in it. I'm scaring the kids? Yes, Dana said softly, bouncing Mason once as if she were the only adult present. This is not the way to handle confusion. Confusion, I repeated. My voice sounded strange to me, flatter than fear, almost curious. You printed sale authorization papers for my house with a fake signature, and I'm confused. Greg set his teeth. Will you stop saying fake? It was a draft signature line. That is not what this is. I shot back, lifting the torn page. The paper shook visibly. You copied my name. You copied how I sign. You put my home on paper like inventory. He folded his arms across his chest, jaw white at the hinges. You're being emotional. The phrase landed in me like a key turning. There it was, the oldest tool in the box. Take a woman's alarm, name it instability, and stand back while she apologizes for having a pulse. But I did not apologize. I felt the old reflex rise and fail. Good, I said. I am emotional. My son is trying to sell my house. Oh, for God's sake, Greg muttered, rubbing a hand over his face. No one is trying to dump you on the street. This is planning. Responsible planning. Responsible planning starts with a conversation, I said. Not forgery. Dana stepped in then, voice dipped in that poisonous calm. Ellie, no one forged anything. Greg sometimes uses sample signatures